Hey everybody, it's John Bauer. I'm the CEO of Bonfire, and I'm joined today by the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Community Management Service, the Lieutenant Colonel Dan Tarbutton. And Lieutenant Colonel, excuse me, is that French, that last name? Is it Tarbutton? You said it was more
No,
English. How
no,
just
it's pretty simple. It's just tar and button.
uh,
It's
Tar?
we 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 go back to English and Scottish Tarbulton, but they changed
Mm.
it on us when we came on the boat back in the 1700s. I think at least that's the story my dad told me.
And
So
you're sticking to it. And anyway, ma'am, thank you so much for being willing to do this. I think you and I first spoke when I started taking over as CEO 2 summers ago, something like that. And when I do these things, I'm on a podcast or lead one or whatever. I always try to start with honor. I was told this a long time ago that honor is honoring who someone is without worrying about who they're not. So I'm not going to throw any shade on you, but man, I wanted to thank you for being on here. But as we're going to get into it, we're going to talk about leadership today. And usually, I'm a sales guy, so I'm like, hey Dan, let's talk about doing some deals with Bonfire and Irvine Company. And a lot of times, when you're selling to people, they're kind of standoffish or dismissive. And man, I wanted to honor your presence and your joy. Like it's not often you have a call where someone's not just like, oh man, yeah, John, I didn't mean to answer your phone call. And I'm like, hey, it's me. So, man, I just want to thank you. I think your presence really is joyful. And as I kind of gotten to speak with you and email with you over the years, I'm like, I want to hang out with you. So I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having a joyful presence and yeah, agreeing to do this with me. So I appreciate it very much.
no, well, thank you, John. We've been chatting about this for a while, and I'm glad we finally have the opportunity to do it. I mean, likewise, every time I chat with you, it turns into a great discussion about character, leadership, and what we're trying to accomplish in work and even in life. And I just
Mm.
appreciate you, man. It's great talking to
Good. Well, before I want you to give them a little background on your kind of life and work, both in the Marine Corps and then at the Irvine Company. But so this podcast, what we're doing with Bonfire is called Around the Bonfire. And for those of you who don't know about us, we are a centralized marketing platform, help people capture leads with AI, help you reach your audience with simple personalized SMS and email, which Dan, by the way, if you want to talk about that here, either during this Zoom or after, we can.
you.
Still want to get you back engaged, which is the last thing we do. We've got a bunch of
there's
marketing
there,
automation.
there's that
Yeah,
sales
there's the
call part.
pitch.
Nice.
Yeah, there it is. There it is. But man, tell us if you don't, for those of you who don't know you, kind of tell us what you're doing in your current context with Irvine Company, and then go back a little bit and just share a brief picture of your, life in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, so currently I'm a senior vice president, Irvine Company, in our multifamily business. And yeah, my title is SVP of Marketing Community Management Services, I guess. But in general, I oversee some of the kind of the centralized operational support activities, marketing obviously being one of them. We have a whole operations support team that does training. We have like on-site support. I do internal communications. And then a big part of my role is or has been overseeing our technology and technology roadmap pretty much since I got here about 9 years ago. So it's been a great journey. This is such a wonderful company. Uh, I can't say enough great things. I've got just an amazing team of people. I've got a couple of vice presidents, slew of directors, senior directors that are just top notch individuals. My peers and my boss here are wonderful. And it's, the Irvine Company is such a unique place, owned by a single owner
Mm,
who has really, made his mark in this organization. And he has a whole organization that focuses on impeccable quality and doing things great. And so in that regard, it's just a wonderful, wonderful place to work. And we've done some pretty great things in the multifamily space, so especially over the last 4 years. So that's my current state. My background, I grew up in DC, or just outside of Washington, DC in Maryland. I went to a private all boys Catholic high school in Washington, DC called Gonzaga. And then I went off to Penn State, where I made it through. My sophomore year wasn't too impressive, but I made it through, and then I started my dream job of becoming a Marine. I think since a very early age, I knew I was going to be a Marine, and sure enough, I was able to do that coming out of college. So I got commissioned in 1995 and spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, primarily as a helicopter pilot at Camp Pendleton out here in California. But during that time, I had 4 incredible years where I had the opportunity to be a presidential helicopter pilot for Presidents Bush and President Obama. My last year of that, I was actually one of the 5 Marine ones who actually flies the president. And then, as a Cobra pilot,
that's low pressure, right? It's a low pressure
yeah,
gig.
yeah. There was not much stress there. It was a pretty chill job. Yeah, I did 3 combat deployments, 2 in a Cobra, and one I actually got to spend a 7 months living with the British in their base as liaison officer back to the Marine Corps. And all these things in my life just have really given me such amazing experiences that have impacted, I guess, me as a person, my character, but also my leadership. And as I'd share with you, one of them, I love talking about leadership. I mean, you and I have joked, we're just on this journey, right? Leadership is a journey. We never really hit the final, goal. We're always learning. But I've enjoyed reflecting back on my time and sharing some of those stories, because my goal is to help people reflect on their own lives as well. Because leadership is just one of these things that is continuously evolving, and it's impacted by every part of your life, inside, outside of work.
On that point, so today what I wanted to talk about with Dan was specifically leadership. I obsess about it. I think about it a lot. I like to read about it, philosophies of leadership, self-leadership, strategic leadership, how you build and maintain a unified leadership team. Anything on that topic I get drawn to. So we'll dive into a little bit of how that looks in the current state of multifamily. But as Dan and I processed before, I wanted it to be something of an encouragement to people. Maybe someone is just starting off their career. Maybe someone is, looking to make a change, but they kind of have a sense like, man, I want to lead, or, and so I wanted to, start there, define it, and then use your life a bit as just talking through some examples. Because yeah, you got social media, and I'm sure we'll be the next Rogan podcast here coming up after this goes viral. But yeah, just as like to give people some encouragement, and then also like an example of like, well, okay, well, what do you do? And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. So, it's interesting. You talked about your role at Irvine and the drive to help centralize, whether it's operations, whether it's, back office stuff or front office. And I always ask that question, well, what is it? What does it mean to y'all and to your shop? And so I want to switch that over on leadership. And just how do you define it personally, whether it's from, how Irvine Company's kind of laid it out, or, in the Marine Corps, but like, who's a leader? What's a leader? How do you actually define it? Because when I talk to people about centralization, it's 50 different things right now, at least as it pertains to multifamily. So yeah, with that idea of leadership, how do you personally define it? What's kind of your, I guess,
Yeah, I mean, I
MO on
don't
that
think
one?
I have a textbook definition for leadership, but I think in general, a way to explain it is leadership is the ability to influence people and or organizations to drive toward a common goal, to drive
That's pretty
toward
good.
achieving some kind of success, right? And I think I think the part of your question there was who is a leader.
Mhm.
I thoroughly believe that everybody's a leader. I think everybody, no matter what their job title is called to lead at some point. And sometimes, at say your level or at my level, leadership is kind of this broad thing, driving strategy and large groups of people. But I also believe that, the leasing consultant on site or the maintenance technician on site also has an incredible ability to lead. Because, in fact, like we define leadership here as everyone leads. because sometimes leadership is just by being a great example. Leadership sometimes is just taking the initiative on something. Leadership can be just doing the best you can at your job, going just above and beyond in everything you do. That sets a tone in an organization or within a group. And so I think every one of those things is leadership, at least in my mind. We've chatted, Marine Corps, going back to the Marine Corps, one of the things that I really learned to appreciate about the Marine Corps, I think I did when I was in, but now that I'm out, for young officers coming to the Marine Corps, you're taught leadership first. So in the Marine Corps, every new officer goes to what's called the basic school in Quantico, Virginia for 6 months. And it's 6 months of training in military skills, obviously running around through the woods, shooting, tactics, all that stuff. But leadership is the main focus, because these young officers are going to be sent out to lead. And another big focus is on ethics, right? Because these young officers are going to be put in all kinds of situations which have ethical and moral implications. So, but that's one thing that's on the officer side I've always appreciated, because you learn leadership before you go learn to do your primary job. So you learn leadership before you go become a pilot, before you go to infantry officer school, before you go to logistics school. The first focus is on leadership. And I've always thought that was amazing. On the enlisted side too, leadership again is at all levels. We expect Marines to lead, a fire team, a corporal in charge of 3 other Marines. That's a leadership role. And so young Marines are taught to lead all through their career as well. And so they learn leadership from a young age. In the corporate world, what I've seen in my limited experience is, the corporate world tends to focus on kind of your tactical skills first. You become a business analyst, you become an accountant, you become a salesperson first, and then as you learn leadership eventually when you get put in the next level, right? It's almost like it's after the fact. There's almost this focus on leadership. And so sometimes what you see is people get promoted into roles maybe they're not quite ready for, or sometimes you got to go back and help people along their leadership journey after the fact and help them overcome some shortcomings instead of maybe prepping them ahead of time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So my background, for those of you who don't know, I was in the ministry for a long time, and don't judge me. It's just my story and where I'm at. But it's almost like you said, on the corporate side, you'll train a skill, and usually around a talent. Like if you see someone that's more got head knowledge, and they can be the analyst, or more practical skills, they can be that maintenance technician, or charm, whatever I've got, and you can go sell. But I've seen, like in my own life, where I had a talent or a gift for something. And so it's almost like you want to ride that wave, whether it's a church or a business. And then they get into a position of leadership and they find that their ethics or their character can't sustain, or hasn't been trained to actually lead in the next kind of level, because there's like a talent there, but not necessarily the grit or really the character to lead. And so I think that's fascinating. I think in my own looking back retrospectively, there's ways where I wish I would have waited or had been trained a little bit more on the leadership side, on the character side, so that it could kind of match as I grew vocationally in my career. So that's a fascinating shift. How would you think that should be overcome? Because I think I love talking about leadership. It's part of the reason why I was drawn to you. I was just like, all right, this guy's the leader. Personally, anytime, any organization, any group, I'm like, well, who's the leader? Hopefully it's not some sort of weird Freudian father complex that I've got. But, there's good and bad leaders and competent ones, different gifts, different skill sets. But I think that's a pretty fascinating idea, is like, if they've got a talent or learning a tactical skill, but if you don't see whether it's at a corporation or whatever else, how do they go about getting that? How do you correct that? How do you allow for that, I guess? Is that a good question?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think there's a couple ways. One thing that we do well within our learning and development organization is we actually have we have a curriculum for potential leaders. Like we have
Yep.
it's for people before they're in a managerial role. It's kind of that intro, kind of formal focus on leadership. But
Which
I
is
think
huge.
yeah, it's great. Like that's one again another pitch for Irvine Company. Like we have incredible career development opportunities here. We have a whole leadership curriculum all the way through through the VP level,
Hmm.
from the people who are just potential new managers. But the other way I think is probably more impactful is to start empowering your people early. Um, empower people when they're young to take something on and drive it instead of always being in the driver's seat. Empower them. Sometimes just give people either a challenge or even we call it commander's intent. Here's the intent of what we want to accomplish. I want you to do it. And then sometimes people are like, whoa, I don't know if I'm ready to do that on my own. And that's when you got to encourage and coach and help them along the way. I think those are powerful ways to get people fired up about leadership, about taking on more. Right? It builds up that sense of accomplishment, the courage, and to do more and lead and jump into those roles instead of being fearful of it.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to Google something here on my own. What's interesting about that is that's there's an inherent risk to that, to empowerment, because people are going to fail.
That's right.
And so they're going to fail, and it's going to be messy. I had a friend who would always joke, "People are messy," and I'm like, "Yeah, I know."
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. So it's like that provides kind
Yeah.
of a risk-taking environment. So
Yeah.
I guess, how do you overcome that? So if you've empowered people to go for it, you know, take on a new task or goal or objective, how do you resist that urge to not get in there and be like that overbearing kind of helicopter SVP? Where, you know what I mean? Where you're just not
Yeah.
going, well, don't do that, don't do that. And all of a sudden it becomes like this control issue. How do you overcome that one? And as you sit in your position?
Well, I mean, I think that is something that that definitely takes a lot of practice, right? I mean, it's not always that easy to just give up control, right? As a lot of us like to control things, right? And it's hard to give up control sometimes. But the other part of it too, I mean, you are there. Your job is to help them succeed, right? And
Mm.
like that's like the way I looked at it was that there was a great quote from Blanchard. Um, Make your goals clear, set the vision, set the goals, make it clear, and then get out of the way and do everything you can to support your people be successful in that, right? So in the early stage, the first time you empower somebody, it might be, yeah, maybe you stay a little bit more engaged, but do you lead by saying, okay, do this, do this, or do you lead by questions and say, hey, have you thought of this? Or asking them what they're thinking, what's your approach here? Or, hey, here's some potential roadblocks you might want to consider. Um, you know, early on when you have a young leader, yes, you do have to stay engaged, but you just can't do it for them, right? And you have to. I think it's a mindset, right? It's not that this thing needs to get done, which it does, but it's also I need this to be a future leader in my organization, and
Mm.
I need to give up control and empower them so that they can grow and take over when I'm gone, or when the next position needs to be filled. It's
I,
it's a different view of our job in business.
mhm.
I
It's
mean,
more upside down. I have this document my father gave to me a long time ago. It talks about a team, to where it could be, you have your kind of hierarchy and you have your structure of the leadership, and then like everyone's going in opposite directions. So it's kind of leaderless. Then you have one where everyone's pointed to the leader, like they're so dependent. It's like
yeah,
kings and serfs, and they're like, well, what do you want me to do? And then there's that independent model where it's more mutual. And so what you're describing seems like idyllic. I've seen it work well in my life. And then there's times where I go into that, like, they become too dependent on me in whatever capacity that I'm leading. They can't, move. And so they're
yeah,
almost paralyzed. And so, yeah, it's not easy to achieve.
Right. And so if it's in that, top down structure, if you're the one at the top and everything has to go through you, think about the inefficiency that creates for your organization, right? Think about, like, if you were the one who has to make all the decisions, well, man, how many decisions are out there that you then got to be deeply involved in enough to make a good decision, so that everybody's relying on you instead of, so that creates probably, inefficiency. But maybe a way, especially as we get higher in an organization, our job is to be what I call a force multiplier, right?
Mm,
We want to make 10 of us out there making good decisions. We want to make 10 of us out there leading things, taking charge, and ensuring the success of an organization instead of just one.
mm-hmm.
Because if everything relies on me, we're going to have roadblock after roadblock. There's not enough time in the day.
So, if the goal of this podcast might to encourage young leadership, and you said at Irvine, one of the values is that everyone's a leader. So someone might feel that kind of like urge, or like, man, I want to participate more in this. My question is, you said this earlier, that when you're looking for leaders, like we need a person to fulfill this role. What are those character qualities that you're looking for? What's a marker, like in your position, whether it was in the Marines or now at Irvine, when you're looking at your team, whether it's internal or perhaps you have an external hire that you're trying to make, what are those markers that you're looking for? What are those character qualities that you're saying, okay, there's something about this man or this woman that you're like, okay, I see potential in them, and I want to, develop them so that they can lead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's probably a lot of factors that weigh on that. I mean, obviously, you want some to know they are somewhat skilled in what they do. I think a lot of it is, one of the things I'd love to look for. I mean, the character. It's easy to say character, but what is their focus on when it comes to people? What is their approach when it comes to people? How do they engage? How do they show? I use the term genuine concern. Are they genuinely concerned about people and their growth and helping them succeed as part of their own role? I think that's incredibly important.
That's incredibly hard because people stink.
Well, not everybody.
Not everybody, but we all have something where it's like that.
I guess maybe I'm also skewed. Again, I said, I love this team I have. Like, I'm so it makes me happy to work with the folks that are on my team, like, because every one of them has been on a growth path. I mean, I've been here 9 years. I've watched many of them kind of come up through the ranks and take on new levels of leadership, and every one of them has done a fascinating job kind of stepping up from, I've got some that were managers who are now directors, senior directors. I've got, some were directors, now a couple of vice presidents who are doing a great job. Each one of those steps along the way required them to change a little bit about their leadership style and approach. Maybe another characteristic is are they willing to learn and grow and challenge their own ways of thinking? I've had some great conversations with a couple of my direct reports on how they approach their working through things with their people, how they grow their own leaders. And it's been a fantastic journey to watch. I think there's probably a lot of pieces to it.
Mm. Yeah. So what you're saying is there's the skill set, they've got some sort of talent or track record, their approach to people, trying to stay connected and kind of give a rip about the people they're leading, real human, and then a willingness to learn and grow. And I'll, not that I'm sponsored by him, but Edwin Freeman, Failure of Nerve, he talks about in his book, it's based off of Bowen's family systems theory, but in essence, he says of leadership, it's this where you're both connected to those people, but then you're your own individual. So you have a connectedness to them to where you actually have an attachment, a deep bond. And Lencioni is another guy I like to read, and he talks a lot about a CEO or a leader of a team, their job is to build and maintain that unified leadership team, and it's hard to do that if you don't give a rip about the person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so I like that idea of like you're connected, but you're also separate because you're your own individual and you're not necessarily drawn into some of the drama that can come from interpersonal relationships. Um,
Yeah,
yes,
and
that's fascinating.
it's a fine line, of course, right? You're not buddy with everybody all the time, and you're not going to the bars and drinking beers with them, going crazy. But that's actually, I like that concept too, because there's times when you have to be in deep with your people, deep engage with them, helping them grow, helping them succeed at whatever they're taking on. But there's also the need to back off just so you can separately look at the organization as a whole, right? So yes, you've got a team of people that you care deeply about, but then sometimes you have to back up and say, okay, how are we doing as an organization? What are the things that we can improve upon? What's going well? What's not going well? All those things, and that requires some reflection on your own sometimes, to step back and see, okay, how is this team actually doing? Like that's a great question all the time for leaders. How is your team actually doing absent of you, right?
Mm.
If you had to step away, how would your team work? I think that'd be a great metric to hold yourself to as you think through some of that.
Well, there's two paths I want to follow on that. On the connected side, I mentioned the example. Would you share that story about your time in Afghanistan, I believe it was, and kind of what you're doing to stay connected to the team on the ground? It was specifically about you guys that were doing some of the mechanical stuff. So can you share that? Because that was like a
Yeah,
good sense. It was like you didn't need to do this, but you did it, and it produced that sense of camaraderie, connection with their leader.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was Afghanistan 2011 and 2012. I was the XO of our squadron, Cobra Huey squadron in combat Afghanistan. Because I was the XO, I was responsible for half the squadron from midnight to noon every day. So I had the night shift in the dead of winter in Afghanistan, and it was pretty
It's
miserable.
lovely that time. Oh, it
It's
wasn't okay.
yeah, there's some great timeshares over there, I can tell you. Um, and so obviously my job is helping run the squadron. During this 12 hours, it's on my shoulders. Um, but I also knew that I had Marines who were sitting out in the cold of night trying to work on helicopters. Sometimes it's raining, winds blowing. It was freaking cold. Um, and so, part of our job as a leader, people need to know you care about them, right? And so I could have just sat in my little, we had these little plywood offices that I had a little desk in. I could have just sat in there all night or whatever else, and sat around the ready room and
Mhm.
just talk nonsense with all the other pilots. But what I actually loved to do was I would just put on my cold weather gear too, and I would just go out and work with the Marines. And I would just, I wasn't qualified to actually do the work on helicopters, but I couldn't do that. But what I could do is I could sit there and hold the tools for them, right?
Mhm.
I could lay underneath the helicopter in the oil and grime, and pass them the wrench or the screwdriver or whatever else they needed, and just talk to them, be with them. Um, that
Presence.
had such, just being present, and being able to step out of this elevated role you're in, and just say, I just need to go be one of them for a little while. And it just had a great, I think just by doing that, I think it just gave them encouragement to keep pushing through despite the misery and everything else. And because they knew that I cared about it. And the joy I got on the back end of that was, this funny little story. In my little wood office, somebody had sent me from home, had sent me this little coffee maker, electric coffee maker. And sure enough, if you can believe it, in Afghanistan, the safety guy comes and checks out our building. And he noticed my coffee stand sitting on a wood box. And he said, well, you can't have a coffee machine in here unless you put a piece of metal under it or something. So I'll never forget. I went into our airframes department, the guys who do all the metal work. And I said, hey, can I just get a piece of scrap metal? I need something to stick under my coffee mug. And they say, yeah, sir, we'll get something to you a little later. And I kind of forgot about it. The next day I went back in and I went into their shop. I said, hey guys, remember I asked about that piece of metal I needed? And, oh yeah, sir. Yeah, we'll get to it. And then the gunny comes over. He's like, yes, sir, they'll get to it. They're busy now. I was like, hey, no big deal. And the next day I came in, and these two lance corporals showed up. So lance corporals, they're private first class lance corporal. Two young guys show up in my office, and I wish I should have brought it with me. They had a piece of metal, but they had sanded it down, they painted it, they put our squadron logo on it, and then they even signed it. And I was like, well, guys, I just needed a piece of metal from a coffee machine. And I'll never forget. They're like, sir, you take care of us, we want to take care of you. And that was like one of those most powerful moments for me as a leader. I was like, gosh, I guess I'm doing it right. I guess this is working. And I still have that piece of metal. It's hanging in my garage above my tool shed, or toolbox. And it's just always a great reminder to me that, sometimes it's little things as leaders that just going and spending some time with the people is just incredibly, incredibly powerful. For the success of the organization or people or anything else you're trying to do.
Yeah. So going back to Friedman, that makes me think. He says what counts about a leader is their presence and being, not necessarily technique and know-how. He goes on and he says, leaders are the white blood cells of an organization, but your presence in that moment, you're underneath these helicopters with a wrench and a flathead and whatever else. Obviously my mechanical skills aren't there, but what counts in that moment to those men was the fact that you're present with them, your presence. So the second,
and you can do that anywhere too. You can do that in almost anything you do. Like, and it's such a simple technique, just connecting with your people. Even just here, just a few weeks ago, we were having, we have a self-guided touring app for leasing, and it has these electronic locks. And we were having trouble with the locks. And there was a bunch of people involved, and I was like, they don't need me speaking into this anymore. I got the right people on it. So instead of just getting deep and trying to micromanage that, I just said, well, I'm just going to go test the locks. So I spent a couple of days just walking around properties testing locks. And, to me, that was the most important thing I could do at that time. It wasn't me trying to troubleshoot, me trying to solve the problem. It was just me. I just wanted to go out and let them know that I cared about what they were trying to accomplish, enough to give up my time to do that. And obviously I did want to help support fixing the locks and test is an important piece of that. But I think the more important thing I was trying to do was to show them how much I'm willing to support as well. Right. Because, I can't do everything. I certainly don't want to do everybody else's job, but sometimes I can
overfunction.
Sometimes I can take a couple steps down and insert myself where maybe it's not needed. Maybe it's not my role, but hey, if I can help out, I can help out.
The presence. So I do want to ask you on this, because you said the other part of a leader is that separation side, we're able to reflect. And man, I want to ask you a million questions about this, but I think that separation is important. And you had talked about just briefly before anxiety. So when you're working with a team, first off, anxiety is just it's almost like a bio indicator that there's something that is going on that you don't know how to solve it just yet. I think I heard Robert Greene say that it's an indication that there's like a flag going off. So it's not a bad thing. It just is. But when you get with people and you have a situation going on, whether it's you're not meeting your goals, you're not getting leased up, or you're not in your sales metrics or whatever it is, anxiety comes into the system, and it's really complicated. So I'm curious your thought, I don't know if it was Friedman or this other guy I'm reading named Creech, when he was talking about if you're trying to lead change, whether it's transitioning like we did with the company from Ireo to Bonfire, whether it's a change in the family, your own family, leadership is inherently about change, and it's inherently therefore about anxiety. So talk about how you separate from the situation, whether you're reflecting personally or like, how do I help lead them and navigate them to the next path? How do I deal with this conflict, this issue, this barrier to entry? How do you manage that change? How do you manage that, your own internal anxiety or even the anxiety that's in the system? What's some insight you have on that?
Um, well, I mean, I think the first thing to recognize is that we are all human. We all have those emotions. Even, you and I have those emotions just as well as anybody else within our organizations who's going through change, right? Um, but I think what's incumbent upon us as leaders is to try to control that emotion as best we can, right? Um, you know, say there's some kind of chaos that's creating anxiety in an organization. Do you feed it or do you try to calm it? Is kind of the question, right? If you if you're just a leader who's going to start saying, "Oh yeah, this does stink," and "Oh, that technology we just implemented was horrible," or that, if you're just
He's
feeding
not talking about
the
Bonfire, by the way. He's not talking about.
no, we don't. We're not a customer. Uh,
Yeah,
but he wants me to be,
not
but
yet.
um, you know, there's always going to be these problems. But if you're the one who just kind of gets in there and says, "Oh yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, I know it's horrible and blah blah blah," that just feeds it. It doesn't solve it. But if you're willing to say, "Okay, hey, okay, yep, okay, it's not working as best as it can right now, but we're going to push through it. What can we do to control it at our level and still get our job done while we wait for something to get fixed?" We know that people are going to help us try to fix whatever this problem is. We just got it. We just have to deal with it as it comes. But it's in a big organization that's hard, right? Because you need all the leaders to be like that. If you have some leaders who are kind of feeding the fire of anxiety, that can spread laterally as well to other groups. People are so connected today with Google Chat or whatever platform you use, and but if people are calm and they are positive about the change and recognize that, hey, part of this change is going to mean some road bumps and some of it might not work as well as possible. But that's okay. We're going to get there. This is the direction we're going. This is our vision, and this is what we're going to achieve. That sets a different tone, and I think that helps calm people down. It helps people along that change curve a little faster. Obviously, you obviously want to recognize what they're going through. You don't want to just push that off, but you also don't want to allow that to fester, right? You want to
Yeah.
try to drive it in a little bit of a different direction, and it may not take one discussion on it. Maybe you have to kind of keep beating the drum beat about something positive about what's going on despite the change. But I think that's controlling the anxiety is a big part of our jobs as
I
leaders, managers, and leaders.
I had a mentor tell me once. He said people don't act stupid for no reason. And so if it's someone's like over functioning or adding to drama, or you're doing it yourself, there's a reason for it. And that's when you talk about controlling the anxiety. To quote Friedman again, he talks about being a non-anxious presence.
Yeah,
And that stabilizes others when they see as a leader, okay, they're calm or like, or appropriately emotional. Like an emotionless leader is kind of hard to follow because people were mirroring one another. We're trying to match and see, attune and see what's going on. And so I found that a measure of grace I can give to people. And I've like in the moment, it's hard because if they like that anxiety comes in or they lose their mind or they, whatever it is, or they contribute negatively, they
yeah,
throw gasoline on the fire. If I could sit back and relax and recognize my own anxiety in the situation, I'm like, oh, okay, you kind of calm, trying to be the calmest person in the room, but it's not easy. Specifically, I'm sure whether it's in the Marines or Irvine Company, you've been in some intense situations where you're like,
right.
okay, let me just try and decompress and then navigate these emotional moments because, people say, it's just business. It's not personal. I'm like, what world are you living in? Because this is personal. I'm
Yeah.
competitive. I want to sell. You're conflicting with me on this. You're contradicting me on where I think we should go. It's
Well,
all personal.
it is personal because everything we do, like what we do at work, is not just work. Right? The things we're doing it's a human endeavor. I like to say, right? There's
Mm,
everything we're doing is a human endeavor. It affects us at emotional levels, physical levels, all that kind of thing, and it carries over. Like if anybody truly says that whatever affects you at work is not going to affect you at home, I think you're full of it, right? Like if I have a bad day at work, that's going to affect me when I get home. So it's my job to figure out, okay, am I controlling that before I get in the house, or have I found a release before I get there, um, or even if something at home is going wrong, that'll affect you at work, right?
mm,
It's a whole life thing, and back to kind of the Marine example, sometimes there, in combat, for instance, you need to overcome that anxiety quick, because if you're the one, if you're in a situation like that and you're projecting the anxiety, the fear, guess what everybody else around you is going to do? So you have to control yourself.
mm.
Like I'll never forget the first time in 2003 when we were crossing from Iraq or Kuwait into Afghanistan. I'll never forget the first time I noticed that somebody was actually shooting at me. And I was like, oh my goodness, what the heck is going like? But then in a second, I was able, I flipped and I was like, okay, now I need to do my job. Um,
Mm.
but then at the same time, in either Iraq or Afghanistan, because we are emotional human beings. Like I would have a Marine who's having serious trouble at home, right? And like I remember one Marine was his wife was having a kid while we were deployed, and the kid was crying. And what did I do? You put your arm around the kid and you cry with him, and so you got to be willing to kind of adjust along those. Like that's not the time to be like, oh, okay, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah,
You know
muscle up,
that
Buttercup.
that's the time to break down to that level and be there with them and meet them at where they're at.
Mm,
If you can meet someone where they're at, then maybe you can help them to a different place.
mm. So, yeah, again, connected and then separate, where you're
Yep.
connected to them, and then you're like your own individual and like learning, which you only do by trial and error. Where there's times where
Exactly.
you're like,
Yeah.
you should be hey, no, it's time to go full Goggins and say, who's going to carry the boats? And then there's times to be more,
Yeah.
fatherly, motherly, whatever. So I, I want to ask you more on the self leadership time, because I think for me, there's times when I'm fired up and I'm like ready to kick down a door, and there's times when I want to lay down and take a nap. May have to do with my home life and the amount of children we have, but I'm wondering how do you keep passion and drive? How do you keep engaged in saying, okay, I need to be connected to them. I want to empower them. I want to let go of control so they can run. I want to then separate and then like rethink, okay, how am I doing? How are we hitting our goals, and like what are the issues that are causing it? How do you maintain, yeah, just more like a sense of life and leadership, like an actual, like, okay, I can, because I got to have drive. Like if I've got to have vision, I've got to have clarity.
Yeah.
And I find that, it just kind of rises and falls. There's times when I'm on the other side of the mountain and I'm like, okay, what the hell's going on here? Because why am I doing, any of this? And maybe, finding your
Yeah.
why. But my curiosity is whether it's a, multifamily with your team, how do you maintain as a leader, passion, passion and purpose?
Uh, well, I'll share my thoughts, but I think first, I think we should recognize that we all have those periods, right? We all have our ups and downs. We all have times where we're really fired up and times where maybe we're not. Um, and that's okay, because that's part of being human. Um, I think for me, in my personality, I try to keep myself, or I try to focus on my character through, I'm kind of a meathead, the gym. Um, I love a sense of accomplishment and a challenge. And if I don't have one, I need to find one. So like a couple of years ago, I'd been here at the company a little while, things weren't necessarily going at the time exactly the way I'd hoped, and blah blah blah. And I remember I was in one of those modes where I was kind of depressed. I was down. Um, and eventually, I let myself go. Here I was, this Marine, but I was up to almost 200 pounds, and all my clothes were tight. I'll tell you a funny story later about growing my hair out because I thought that's what I needed to do in the civilian world. Blah blah blah.
That
But
doesn't
what I
suit you, I don't think.
no, it didn't work very long, and my wife hated it. But for me, that's when I really refound physical fitness again. And it's because I knew I needed to get back in shape because I felt horrible. Um, but it also, what I realized over the course of being back in the gym is I love the gym because I can set a goal for myself and achieve it. And when I achieve that goal, I feel really, really good. And when I can take care of myself in that way and make sure that I'm feeling positive about myself through challenge, then I know I'm in a better position to lead too. So I set some stupid goal about how much I want to bench or how much I want to deadlift. Um, and it takes dedication. It forces you to get up and get to the gym every morning and stick to your routine and eat right and do all that. But man, when you hit those goals, it just produces a fire in my belly uh, to go do more. Right? It fires me up to take on that next thing, whether work, home, anywhere. And
You,
I think personal challenges are an incredible way to develop character. Um, there's a couple of folks I love to chat about. What are you doing that's hard outside of work? Find something outside of work in your personal life that you can take on that is hard. Because I guarantee if you stick to it and you achieve that, you will feel great about yourself and you'll be in a better place to lead.
it's interesting. You talk about that, and then you talked about what was it? It's a human endeavor, business,
Yeah.
and what I'm hearing you say, something I've tried to talk about, is like having an integrated life. So it's like, well, your home life is going to affect your work life and vice versa, but then your physical health affects your mental health, your leadership. And I've found, it's my experience, that in America, just like we have like, really red, really blue, it's like so divided that it's even like down on the personal level where we're more disintegrated than we are integrated. Our sense of identity, purpose, physical, mental health, it's all these like separate things, a little bipolar, to be frank, which I could
Yeah.
go off on a whole tangent on that. But what I hear you saying is like, look, if you've got that desire to lead, then part of the way you do that is by doing something outside of it to help feed. Like you said, when's the last, would you say, do hard things?
Yeah. Do hard things. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Yeah. But
simple.
the physical nature of it and how that impacts your mental health, emotional health, relational integration with the team, your own vision and values is fascinating. So that's something that
Yeah.
I've really, when I, my low point as a leader was 28, 19. And that's when I found that the physical nature of working out helped so much.
Oh,
Um,
it's
as I,
it's dramatic. Yeah.
yeah, that's incredible. So,
you know
so
and
that's part of how you do it. Go ahead.
it is an interesting thing, for comparison for me too, is that integration in this civilian world is very different for me than the integration in the Marine Corps world. In the Marine Corps
Mm,
world, everything is incredibly integrated, and that's maybe what makes the Marine Corps such an amazing institution in this country. Is you are a Marine. Like, once a Marine, always a Marine. There's all those statements, but like that is who you are, is a Marine, and you get married. Like, my wife did an amazing job of this, of becoming a Marine with me. Right? I think being a Marine spouse and being part of the Marine Corps was every bit of as much a piece of who she was too, which made her, she was incredible at taking care of my kids while I was gone. I mean, she went and got her doctorate in education while I was messing around in Afghanistan. While we still had little kids, it's that as a family we were completely integrated into my profession,
mm,
and even within the Marines that you work with, everybody's completely integrated there too. So not only are you talk to Marines and leading them to accomplish a mission, but we're also talking to our Marines, especially while we're deployed, about, hey, how's your family doing? You're talking through them with them through tough times. You don't act like that family life that's happening at home is not impacting them while they're sitting in Iraq or Afghanistan. And so you have this incredibly close-knit organization because of that integration you were just talking about. The corporate world is hard.
Mm.
You know, it's hard to create that same integration because there's HR rules, right? There's people aren't as, or maybe not as committed to everything the same way you are. There's not as It's hard to create that closeness. You're not going to bring everybody's families together all the time. I mean, some of the stuff would have done in the Marine Corps. So that's I think that's a huge challenge for us is how do we create that integration at a level that's appropriate.
Oh, you'll get me fired up on this one, man. I love it or hate it. The human being is wired to be in a deeply, connected and attached environment. And I've seen in my years, you can tell when people start to detach, they start to lose because that, whether it's the family thing or the grass is greener somewhere else. But yeah, that's a fascinating one on the corporate world, how you actually do that in an appropriate way, as is appropriate. One of my mentors said that, as is appropriate. How do you integrate that? How do you care and know? Because yeah, some people can overcompensate. I've seen it in some places where it's like a false sense of, community and like, we're doing this together. And they're like, actually, no, I don't care about you. Go make me some more money.
Yeah, I don't want your mandatory fund.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Forced fellowship is what I call it. If I sense forced fellowship, I'm like, screw off. But that genuine sense, koinonia, as we talked about Greek words last time, that deep sense of like, we're actually doing something together, a human endeavor. I like that.
Yeah.
That's bloody hard, specifically with like our team was all in town this week from, COVID, everyone kind of went remote, but everybody was here and it was almost like too much because we were excited and we're just kind of, going back and forth because we hadn't seen each other in a long time. But it's so critical to actually have a unified team. Like we actually know somewhat, but not too much. It's a very fine line. So
it is,
if you figure that one out, let me know.
And I mean, especially now, I mean, like, we here at my work, we're back in the office like 5 days a week. And to me, I think being in person together is really, really important because it does create that team atmosphere. I hated COVID. I hated trying to, constantly talk to people through Zoom and, let's have a team celebration. Like some of that it just falls flat. And a lot of communication. I can see your face and you can see mine and we're having a good discussion, but you still miss out on a lot of those, those nonverbal cues sometimes, especially when you're with a group of people. That I think are so important in communication with your team and as a team. So this virtual world is another challenge for us as leaders to navigate too. And I'd be interested in how you navigate that because I'll be honest, I've worked 3 days in my garage when COVID started, and I was like, I can't do this. And I went and sat in my office. And, it was crazy.
Now, I think I have found, because our leadership team is in 3 different cities, and when we are not connected, and it's like my wife and I, we've got 5 freaking kids, and I mean, baseball season has started, so it's just like goodbye. I mean, I'm hauling butt at fighting traffic, trying to get home. So when my wife and I have had the most healthy cadence and rhythm, it's been when we've had these kind of family planning sessions, because like when I'm like ready to hit like just fall asleep, she's like, oh, by the way, we have this financial issue to address and then this scheduling thing. And I'm like, my anxiety then goes up And so if we will actually intentionally set time to connect both on the relational side and then on the practical side, we're much better. So the same is true of our leadership team, because when it, I don't know how much you've experienced this at work, but when we don't, and then you get an email that is kind of, they've either written it
Yep.
poorly or you're too dumb to interpret what they've actually said, then you get
Yeah.
pissed. And
Right.
so Russell Taylor, forgive me, but like it's easy to like at a drop of a hat because the anxiety comes in, revenue does this, whatever
Yeah.
else issue comes there, insurance drives up by 1,000,000% because of whatever the heck's going on in the economy, and you can just snap. And so you have to fight for time, and time is, I think, more our most valuable asset. And so there has to be a measure of the human element, which I think I'm pretty good at almost like as a default. I could focus too much on that versus the tactical because I'm like, all right, let's
Mm.
get an understanding what's going on. But if you can have when you if it's been a while since you've talked to your team or like in person on the phone, I think it just kills it and it sends people off in silos, and then all the mental stuff that comes in just blows
Yeah.
up teams with something that isn't even an issue, which I want to talk about conflict at close. But yeah, man, I think it's bloody hard. It takes time. It's consuming, but it's like my buddy Sorrows would always say, you can go faster alone, but you can go further together. So like, not the forced fellowship of like, tell me about your favorite color, Dan, but it's like, no, give me a picture of what's going on. I mean, you gave me a snippet just right before. I was like, oh, okay, this is what's going on in his world. Here's
Yeah.
what's going on in my world. And then it's like, once you're connected, you can roll. So,
Yeah. I
um,
mean, and again, because I'm sure you got all kinds of different leaders. Like, what a way to for young leaders to kind of work on that is don't go straight to business when you have a meeting. Spend a couple minutes just talking about whatever. You know, when you have a one on one with somebody, don't start with, okay, where are you at on your goals, blah blah blah. Hey, how was your weekend? How's the family doing? Are you having a good time? Are you feeling challenged? Connect with somebody first, and then get to the business. I think is a better way to go.
mm,
Um,
yeah.
it's not
We were
always
being
easy,
pitched.
but
No, it's not easy. We were being pitched yesterday for, I was being sold to. The shoe was on the other foot, and he went right for it. And we ended up connecting afterwards because I challenged him and pushed back on him. But it was a good sale. But yeah, that's because that it's such technology just amplified the anxiety of like go 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 go, and did I do enough and all this
yeah,
other jazz. And so yeah, I think the connecting, the way we talk about it is, give me a high and a low. It doesn't have to be,
mm,
hopefully, and I always put a little governor on it. I'm like, hey, Dan, give me one high, one low, one thing you want me to know. But I don't want to know the deepest, darkest. So I'm like, I don't want to hear about how like, you know, you're not loved by your father. Just put your pause on that. But then, helping people, just something human about it. It really gets that
yeah,
connection going. And then what wires together fires together, and then you can
yeah.
move off that. So anyway, fascinating. All right. I think I could keep talking or asking you questions and vice versa, but I want you to just kind of end with any kind of summation thoughts. You're like, man, for that, young person, that person that maybe even is my age, your age, and older, is feeling kind of stuck. What's the encouragement you would give them? Encouragement being like peeling back their bones and putting some strength in them, for leaders. How could you encourage them to move
I mean,
forward here in the rest of the year?
like I think like we have as our definition of leadership, and what I know from the Marine Corps, everyone can be a leader. There's everybody who has any calling to be a leader, even if they don't feel like they're called, is going to step up and be a leader. Um, it takes some focus. It take if you want to be a great leader, it takes a focus on yourself first. Focus on your character. Focus on challenging yourself to look inwardly and understand what your values are, and who you are as a person, and
Well
how
defined.
your life experiences has affected you, so that at least you have the basic foundation of who you are. And then as you go to lead, rely on those values, right? Rely on who you are, and your character to guide you. And I think people can be very, very successful that way. It's, for me, I try to use a mantra in my mind to keep me focused is just genuine concern. And in the long form of that is, if I'm genuinely concerned about my people and I'm genuinely concerned at the mission at hand, we will be successful. And I think anybody can do that if you just care about that stuff. Sometimes they conflict, and there's times where you got to focus more on your people than your mission, and vice versa. But if you can approach it with a genuine concern of what you want to accomplish with your team, I think you're set up to lead. It's really that easy. We're all good. Nobody's perfect leader. You and I are on a journey. There is no final destination here. We're always learning. We're always got new experiences, new people, but it doesn't mean we stop. People need us to lead, and so we will. And anyone that's listening to this podcast can do the same exact thing, I think.
That's good, man. I could feel the self-doubt going, but he's not talking about you. And you're like, get away. But I won't belabor my own issues, man. Anyway, Dan, I appreciate it. We'll talk next week about selling you Bonfire, Irvine Company, hashtag 2024.
I'll be on vacation next week, so.
Dang it. All right. I appreciate it, man. Thank y'all for listening. Like and subscribe. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, brother.
Bye.